Good day. My name is Erin. I'm the creator of Scorned Clothing and the person who will be walking you through the Anastasia peasant skirt pattern. I had a lot of fun making this and I hope you do too. Thank you very, very much for your purchase. It really helps me along. And without further ado, let's get at her. We're going to start by cutting out the waistband. You're going to want two pieces. Place the right hand side of your pattern on the fold where it says place on fold. The grain line is indicated by the long arrow stricken through each pattern piece. When it comes to cutting out the tiers, you're going to have to do a little bit of math. I wanted my skirt from my waistline to the floor to be no more than 40 inches. Now I've got an inseam of about 32 inches, but this is from the waistband, or your true waist. So think about that measurement and then divide it by 4. I ended up with 10 inches plus my seam allowance of a ½ inch on either side, or all sides technically, so I ended up cutting 11-inch strips. This was followed by a fair bit of math. I've done it all for you to make sure that you understand exactly how long to make each tier, because you will need for the bottom 2 tiers to cut strips and then sew them together to make the yardage that you're going to need. These yardage amounts are based off of a 54-inch bolt. You've got much more exacting requirements in the written instructions. Please refer to the written instructions for the exact amounts per tier for your size. Now we're going to cut out the backing piece that's going to go behind the corset portion of the closure of the skirt. You're going to want to cut 2 of these, and you can make it out of either fabric. It's going to be on the top tier. You can either make it contrasting with that fabric that you've chosen for the top tier, or you can make it the same so that it blends in. Now that we've got all of our pieces cut out, we're going to start with the waistband. Fold open both of the waistband pieces and place them right sides together. Pin your waistband pieces together, starting just slightly above the pointed portion of the bottom of the waistband where it's going to attach to the skirt, and sew all the way along the sides and top of the waistband to close it. Just because I'm using a serger doesn't mean you can't use your regular sewing machine. Just stay within the stitch allowance that you've allotted for yourself. Clip the top 2 corners, and now we're going to add roughly an inch or so of fusible stabilizer to each side along where we're going to put the grommets in. This will be determined on the size of your grommets. If you decided to get a different size, go a little bit bigger. You can always have more stabilizer, but it's not good if you don't have enough. So just cut pieces that are going to be at least twice as wide as your grommets, or if you're following my instructions and using the same size grommets as me, then use about 1 inch to 1.5 inches, at least 1 inch though. You'll notice that I have a couple of little bit of 1 inch sticking off of my waistband for my Fusion stabilizer. I noticed that there was some shrinkage, so I just wanted to cut it after I had ironed it on. Now we're going to turn the waistband right side out, and we're going to press along the seam edges that we want to flatten. What I'm doing here is I'm using my ruler to push out the sides of the seam so that I can get a really good press. Now we're going to fold the waistband in half and put it over top of the top tier that is also folded in half, and we're going to match up the fold sides. Make sure that the bottom portion of the tier and the top part of the waistband are parallel with each other, squared off. Then, whatever your tier height is supposed to be, mine was 10 inches, make sure that you double your seam allowance between the bottom of the tier and the top of the waistband. So for me, the top of the waistband would have been 11 inches from the bottom of the tier when I made the cut. Match up both fold sides, so the smallest portion at the tier and the largest portion at the waistband. Put right sides together and pin from the center line, moving to the outside on each end. When arranging your gathers for this skirt, you don't have to be absolutely precise. What I ended up doing was, on each side, I just picked a center spot and then rearranged for the centers of that spot, and then rearranged for the centers of those spots, and so on and so forth. I eventually just put the little pleats where they needed to go. Now, sew right sides together the top tier portion and the one side of the waistband portion. Once again, you can use a regular sewing machine just fine. I'm using my serger because it's just easier for me. Now it's time to add the second tier. Make sure both of the centers are matched and then both of the sides. Always right sides together. I used the same method for making the little pleats as I did for the top tier to the waistband. I just picked centers and then centered some more off of those spaces and centered more off of those spaces. Each time making tiny little pleats as I went along. Before moving on and sewing, your layers should look somewhat like this. We're going to use the exact same method to add the third tier to the second tier of the skirt. Match up your sides and your center portion, creating new centers as you make your pleats the whole way along. After you've got the third tier pinned to the second tier, always right sides together, just sew it up. You'll be getting rather familiar with this process by now. We're going to do the exact same thing to add the last tier. We're always right sides together. We're going to find our centers and our sides, and then we're going to make little centers off of those, and then make little centers off of those, and keep on going until we've got all of the tiny little pleats matched up with from the fourth tier to the third tier. My little boy Addie likes to be a little helper kitty. You may have noticed some of his hair on my stuff. This is because he's a sweetheart and thinks that he needs to be involved in everything that I do. Now we're just going to sew the fourth tier to the third tier in the same method that we have been for all the other tiers. Now, you should have a skirt that is open along one side. What we're going to do is put right sides together, as always, and sew them closed. Keep in mind that we want to leave the top tier open. That's the waistband and the top tier. So only sew together the the bottom three tiers. So the second, third, and fourth tier. Sew those together, leaving the top tier and waistband open. Take the 2 pieces for the corset cover flap and sew them together, right sides together, along 3 sides, leaving one side open so that you can turn it right side out and close the last side. Now we're going to press the side seam of the skirt to one side, and at the waistband we're going to make sure that we press the seams towards the inside along our seam allowance. This is going to make it easier for us to add the corset cover flap. Where the inside portion of the waistband is going to meet with the top tier, we want to turn that seam allowance up towards the inside and press. You can also pin in place along this time so that you can make it easier for sewing. Before we sew the bottom portion of the waistband closed along the top tier, we're going to add some boning to add some structure to our sides of our grommets. How you measure that is just take some boning, put it along the area you're going to insert it, which is the side of the waistband, and then cut to fit. Make it just slightly shorter. You can do it a seam allowance shorter if you want so that you don't have to sew over top of it, but most boning that you get is sewable boning. You just sew right over top of it and it'll be fine. Once you've got it cut, insert inside the waistband along the seam allowance. This might take a little bit of doing, just be patient and kind of wiggle it around a bit. Make sure to insert the boning along both sides of the open waistband. Now we're going to sew the waistband closed. Working from the right side, we're going to sew the entire thing along its edges. We're going to move just outside of the boning so that the seam allowance has the boning on the far side and we've stitched towards the inside. Everything else, get as close as you can to the edge and top stitch neatly all the way around. Now we're going to stitch the seam allowances towards the inside along the portion of the waistband that we've left open, just to make it neat and tidy so that when we add our flap that goes on the inside of the corset, it looks nice and tidy. We're going to add the grommets before we add the flap behind them so that we know where they go and we're not going to sew through where we want to put them. follow the instructions for your grommets. I'm using 1/4 inch and I ordered them from Sewing Depot, Canada. You can get them at your local fabric store. Sometimes they'll come with setting tools. Sometimes you'll have to buy the setting tools separately. It's all rather unique to each one of the grommets that you're going to get, so make sure that you follow the instructions for whatever set of grommets you end up purchasing. You can choose to add as many grommets as you want. I used 3 on each side for a total of 6. Space them equally along the open portion of the waistband. Finally, we're going to take our corset cover flap and we're going to align it with whatever side you want. I aligned mine with the back side so that I could fold it towards the front. I thought that would be easier. And make sure that you pin just inside of where you've placed your grommets so that your your cord can nicely move outside of it. Now sew your corset cover flap along one of the open sides of the top tier and waistband of your skirt. Unfortunately, I lost the footage for me turning up the bottom hem of the skirt to give it a nice finish, but you're basically done. That's all you have to do is just turn up the very bottom hem of the 4th tier of your skirt, your seam allowance, stitch closed, give it a nice press, and you're all done.